All right, almost through. So for our last module, we will be talking about assessing performance and outcomes. So this is thinking more about someone who's been at your organization for a while. And so probably the most common ones of these that most people are aware of are supervisory performance ratings. This is something we have as professors. Our deans will rate us each year. Most organizations have some sort of performance rating in place. So what criteria are going to be used to rate job performance? This becomes really important. And you also need to make sure those criteria are consistent. So, like supervisor A isn't using one form and supervisor B isn't using a totally different form. Once you've agreed on the form between supervisor A and supervisor B and C, D, and E, what you need to do then is get them in a room and make sure they're all rating the same way. And so this is called inter-rater reliability. So the idea is if any one of them were to rate the same employee, the ratings would be very, very similar, if not identical. You also need to make sure that the criteria you're using map onto future performance, right? Just like we talked about with, assessments for hiring, mapping onto the job analysis, we need to make sure we're measuring things that matter. And then think about how to improve these things using rating scales. So there can be an absolute rating scale where you say, here is the performance standard, and here is how you compare to it. You can also do relative. You are better than X number of people in your team. And so again, give you an example from what I'm familiar with. We are rated on an absolute compared to the standards laid out for faculty in the handbook for 3 areas: teaching, professional development, and service to the institution. And so we are given ratings by our deans on each of those. However, our deans might also choose to include something like relative ratings and say something like, your teaching evaluations are in the top 10% of everyone I'm in the Bertone School of Social Science. And again, just as I mentioned with the inter-rater reliability part, you want to train and norm the raters on the rating scales so that everybody's using it the same way to ensure maximum fairness, and also just that it's being used the way that you created and intended it to be used. So you can think about objective measures, right? Things like number of absences. If you're in a position where you're selling something, your sales figures, production rates, if you are involved in production, if you are working on, let's say, an assembly line, something along those lines. Job and salary level. You can think about, did this person receive any awards this year? We've talked about work samples quite a bit, looking at things like that. Job knowledge tests. This is something my husband has to do. He works at the Naval Shipyard, and every so often, it might be every 5 years, he has to take a requalification exam to make sure he is up to date on everything. So that can be really important. And then if there's any disciplinary cases, and then how has that person responded to those? Have they actually improved? And you can create a model integrating all these measures with ratings. And there's an excellent example in your book in table 23.1. Now, some of the other factors you can measure here we've mentioned in passing. So one is citizenship to the organization. Basically, how much are they contributing with their work performance? So here's a couple different examples. So citizenship performance, where they help a coworker learn new skills, right? Help new employees get oriented to the job. The idea is these might not be part of your job description, but you're willing to help out other people as needed. Task performance has to do with essentially how you think you're doing at your job. Are you adequately completing your assigned duties? Are you meeting the formal performance requirements of your job? So those are citizenship. Basically, are you being a good citizen employee? On the other side, again, we've talked about these before, you can look at counterproductive work behaviors. And these are things that would get in the way of either your performance or like the company's overall performance. And so things like taking a longer break than you're supposed to, purposely worked slowly when things needed to get done, starting arguments with people, especially if it's for no reason. One of the things I really like that your book has a chapter about, because it's a realistic thing, especially in this day and age, is turnover, right? And so what we're finding, especially with Gen Z and the folks coming up behind them, is that because of the way the job market is, folks are not staying at one job as long anymore. If they will see that at another organization, they're going to get better pay, better benefits, they're going to move there, right? And so one of the things organizations needs to do are think about, why are people quitting? Why are people voluntarily turning over, leaving? So there could be a perceived desirability of quitting, a push, toxic work environments, micromanaging manager, right? Things along those lines. And also perceived ease of movement, a pull. If within your industry, it's sort of accepted that people are going to move around and maybe even get poached by other companies, right? That can be a pull. Community embeddedness is another big one. Do they feel like they are attached to your workplace? What are their occupational and professional commitments, right? Let's say you're in a field where people need to get licensed, right? Is your organization helping them pay for continuing education credits, things along those lines? Reasons. You need to think about reasons people stay, and also reasons why people decide against staying, right? And this shouldn't just be exit interviews, right? You should be thinking about these things and how you can improve the environment over time. Shocks. So perceived life events. Someone gets married, their family moves, right? There's a death in the family. They have to care for an elderly relative. Those things can affect voluntary turnover as well. And then motives. Why is that person leaving? Is it feelings? Are there contractual obligations keeping them there? Or maybe those are done. Calculating the match of your organization with their goals. Expectations from others of whether they'll stay or go. Moral feelings about turnover. Again, the younger generations are caring less about that. People, my folks' generations, the boomers, are like, no, you stay at one place your whole career. It's not really a thing anymore. And also, what else is going on in the workplace? You could have the best bosses, great environment with great benefits, but there's one or two other people in that workplace. You don't want to be there anymore with them. So who quits? There are demographic factors that can come into play here. Education, particularly if someone is overqualified for a position, and sometimes this is referred to as underemployment. They have a higher degree, but your company doesn't require one, but they just needed a job, right? Those people are much more likely to move on when an opportunity presents itself. Your highest and your lowest performers are more likely to leave. Your highest performers might be recruited by other organizations, might feel unappreciated or like the work isn't challenging them. And then their lowest performers will kind of get more of that push, right? Of like, this isn't the right place for you. Now, in terms of those big five personality traits, we know that extroversion, just being an outgoing person, agreeableness, those traits are more related to staying, right? If you can make a community where you are, you're going to feel good about it. Things that are related to turnover, neuroticism, and sort of that negative side, but also openness to experience, people that are creative, who want the challenge of new things. It's unclear how conscientiousness is related. There seem to be mixed findings in studies. There are also obviously institutional issues related to turnover. Hiring is a big part of this. You want to focus on selecting people you feel like are going to stay. Sometimes organizations do that. Sometimes organizations just want a warm body. You can think about things like bio data, pre-hire attitude surveys, and those personality tests we've been talking about all semester. And we need to think about the cost benefit of the organization of turnover. And it's going to depend on who leaves, right? If it's your low performing people, if your high performing people keep leaving, that's a problem, right? And so there are costs. There are separation costs. Maybe someone will be owed some sort of severance package, and then replacement costs. It costs something on the order of like the person's salary and a half typically to replace someone when there's a very extensive interview process. So, for example, in academia, when we're flying people out, wining and dining them, things like that. But there can be benefits to the company. This is sketchy for everybody else involved, but you might not fill that position if someone leaves, or you fill it with someone at a lower salary. Again, can be sketchy. But you could also have the option where you end up just hiring someone who's a better match to the position or to your organization. Another thing that we look at is adaptive performance and trainability. So, can these employees handle crisis situations? Can they handle stress in the workplace? Are they creative with their problem solving? Can they deal with unpredictable situations that might not be a crisis, but are still like kind of thrown at them? Are they up for learning new things, and do they do that well? Do they have interpersonal adaptability and cultural adaptability? And can they adapt to changes in the physical environment? What are some of the predictors of these things? Cognitive complexity, so the ability of that person to integrate and organize information. Resiliency makes sense, right? If you're a resilient person, you can persist and recover from hardship. You're going to be adaptable. Learning goal orientation, people who want to learn are going to be really trainable, right? They get joy out of it. Metacognitive skills, those thought processes. Frame changing skills, adapt to multiple ways of doing something, learning agility, applying lessons to new situations, in general problem solving skills, emotion regulation skills. So this is like being able to know how to handle something in the moment and then maybe vent later, right? Self-awareness is a big part of that. And then developmental efficacy, people who have confidence in their own capacity to learn and apply new skills. I also love that your book includes this chapter because I think it's really important. So, what are the reactions of applicants who have to go through these testing procedures? Well, things that are important to them are justice, when they feel like this is a just process, it's a fair process. So, procedural justice, they think the selection procedure is actually related to the job and not just superfluous. The opportunity to demonstrate the abilities that they have, that the process is consistent across applicants. So if they have a friend applying for the same position, the friend didn't have a different process. Opportunity to be reconsidered if there is an unfavorable decision. Informational justice, they want information about the selection procedure. What is it going to take? They don't want a third interview sprung on them when they told they were only going to be two. Timely feedback. So one of the things you need to do as someone who's hiring people is let them know when they're not hired, so they're not like hanging on. Open and honest communication is part of that. And then interpersonal justice, that the interviewer is treating the applicants with warmth and respect. They're not condescending, they're not an hour late, things along those lines. You have the chance to communicate throughout the selection process. And then that the questions and procedures are appropriate, legal, ethical, etc. Alrighty, so that is our last mini lecture. I hope that you have really enjoyed learning about the ins and outs of assessment in this course.